Well, President Trump announced a partial trade deal with China. All of this trade talk optimism that the market's been high on for the last few months seems to have culminated in at least something. Even if it is something so minor, at least Trump has given the optimists some grain of hope. He's given them some sign of progress, even if though it's being incredibly overstated by him and his advisors. Trump is characterizing this as phase one, sort of a first step down the path to a full new trading relationship with communist China. And in reality, that's not really what this is. This is the deal that was cut has very specific terms. It's not a part of a broader theme. It's not something that can be replicated and that can be built upon, because what Trump and the Chinese agreed to was essentially that China's going to buy more pork and soybeans. In fact, they're probably going to go back to the levels that they were buying before the trade war. And so, the U.S. is not improving its position, from the standpoint of people who are in favor of this trade war. All that Trump managed to do was undo some of the damage that was done by the trade war, and only with respect to two commodities, that being, of course, pork and soybeans. Now, upon hearing this news, I didn't think that it represented really any progress at all, because, China right now is in a very peculiar position. They have this whole, like pork Ebola type outbreak happening, to where a large portion of their pork supply, and of course China produces a lot of pigs, is being wiped out, and they don't know what's causing this disease. And I've seen terrible videos to where they've had to dig these massive trenches and then just take tractors and load thousands of live pigs into the hole because the farm had become contaminated and they were trying to contain the outbreak. China is in a very bad state right now when it comes to food. And when you're a communist state like that, somewhat communist, people still expect food prices to be somewhat stable, and that's the government's job. So the Chinese government isn't going to be able to stabilize pork prices with all this crap happening without importing more pigs from outside of China. And just so happens that the United States has a lot of pigs for sale. So it's not like the Chinese are giving anything up by agreeing to buy more pork and soybeans. They have to feed their people. So this is something that the Chinese, I think, were going to have to find their way to one way or the other. And so obviously, you can't replicate this kind of deal in other areas, because it's not like China has a massive shortage of all these other things that Trump wants the Chinese to start buying. Most manufactured goods that we have in the U.S., China can produce themselves for less money and just buy that tariff-free. And most goods that are produced in the U.S. that they can't produce themselves in China, most likely were already being consumed by Chinese consumers. And so an agreement to purchase more, well, not more, but go back to the old levels of purchasing of pork and soybeans is not analogous to really any other situation. And so, with or without this deal, the Chinese and the Americans are just as far apart as they ever were. And as I've said before, I don't expect any serious trade deal. I think that the best case scenario is a return to the status quo. I don't think that anything's really going to come of all this. I think that the trade talk optimism has been absurd. Within minutes of this deal being announced, Trump and the Chinese were already downplaying expectations, because Trump came out and after they said they agreed to a deal, he said, well, there's nothing in writing, and, none of us have signed anything. This is all just sort of up in our heads right now, which is a nice way of saying that they really haven't made a deal at all, because until you start putting things down on paper, you can't really argue over details. They haven't argued over any details at all, really, it seems, just that, the Chinese want to buy some pork because they need it or else they're going to starve. And Trump even went so far as to say, you know what, we're not going to sign anything for another month. It could fall apart in that time. I don't know. So Trump really is not hyping this deal up too much. except in his normal way of saying, hey, before we were mortal enemies, now over here it's a love fest. Now, Chinese media, for their part, are not really mentioning anything about the too much detail about about when things are going to get signed, or whether or not this is a sure thing. And it's hard for me because I don't speak Mandarin, so I don't know exactly what they were saying. But I'm taking this from what the editor of the Global Times, which is China's, I believe it's a state newspaper that's published in English. He was talking about what the Chinese media domestically is saying, and he was saying it was pretty clear that they are also downplaying expectations for whether or not this deal will even happen, that they're definitely leaving open the possibility that nothing will come of this, which seems pretty likely to me. And of course, as a part of this, Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, announced that tariffs will not be going up this month on China. Of course, he didn't say anything about whether or not they'll go up in December, which is another sign that, well, perhaps we aren't making any real progress, because in the meantime, if this falls apart, well, then they'll just raise tariffs again in December. Now, I thought it was quite interesting. I've been making fun of stocks for so long for going up just on trade talk optimism and no real deal. Here they actually got somewhat of a deal. There's at least, you can argue that there's some progress here. It's better than optimism. It's better than rumors. Trump and the Chinese are actually coming out and saying, hey, we actually want to get something done here, and it looks like we're going to sign a deal here soon. You would think that, considering how much the market has rallied off of optimism, that, you would have seen a completely, vertical rally, and probably would have made new highs. But in fact, that did not happen. Interestingly enough, the market sold the news. The S&P dropped about 20 points, I think. I believe it was over 50 before this news, and then closed at about 31 points up. I don't remember what the exact total amount of points was that it closed yesterday, but it was up about 31 points, which is still a huge gain. But that's way down from before Trump announced his pork deal. So this tells me one of two things. One, the market was pricing in a better trade deal, something more significant than just the Chinese buying some pigs. Or two, that we have a buy the rumor, sell the fact situation, to where the market is getting bid up on all this trade talk optimism, and then as soon as you have a trade deal, everyone's going to sell off and cash in, because at that point, everything will have been realized. There's nothing more to hope for. There's no more reason for the price to go up. And so if there's no reason for the price to go up, well, then it's going to fall. Now, this has been a very interesting week, full of all sorts of good news for the equity markets, including QE Infinity, which I'll have to discuss tomorrow. But if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.